Welcome to the Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm your host Maz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Today I'm continuing the coverage of the situation in Afghanistan, and I know that some might accuse me of making these podcasts too long for the current crisis. But to those I say that I'm not actually a journalist. I'm a podcaster, and the whole purpose of this podcast is to give those voices who we don't hear in the day-to-day media the time and space to share their story. And this episode in particular is recorded in that vein. This morning I'm speaking with Hizbullah Khan, a journalist and political analyst writing on war and terrorism in Afghanistan since 2014. He writes for outlets like the BBC World, The Independent, The Diplomat, The Globe Post, and at least another 20 international publications. He joins me on this morning of 17th of August from Kabul, where it is just after midnight or a couple of hours after midnight, to discuss the unfolding situation from the ground. Hizbullah, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.
So just before we get to the current situation on the ground, I think it's important to just set a little bit of context about your own background and so who you are and what type of work have you been doing over the past nearly 10 years.
I am Hizbullah Khan, basically from Kabul, writing about the war and terrorism for the past 7 years in the international media. And I covered stories, features in various parts of Afghanistan during the war, and I have also covered war for 7 years in Afghanistan.
Mm. And of course, the current situation, it's certainly no stretch to say that even speaking to me right now is potentially at some great risk to yourself. We know that from 2 days ago, the government of Afghanistan has collapsed. Maybe a good place to start for us is to give people an understanding from your perspective, from the ground, why the government even collapsed in the first place.
Thank you. That is a very good question. Firstly, when the Taliban got their office in the Doha, international community has provided full-fledged support to them. And particularly, there was an agreement in 2020 between the Taliban and the Trump administration. In that agreement, the Trump administration pledged with the Taliban that they would withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan completely. And the second promise of the Trump administration with the Taliban, that the Trump administration forced Afghan government to release 5,000 withdrawn fighters of the Taliban. So on the other hand, in exchange for commitment, the Taliban also made 3 promises with the Trump government. The first one was to reduce violence, which lead to ceasefire. The second agreement that the Taliban would completely end their relation with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. And the third commitment of the Taliban was that they promised that they will sincerely participate in the intra-Afghan talks. On one side, the Trump administration has entirely fulfilled its promises. On the other side, the Taliban completely opposed that agreement and not fulfill a single promise. On the other side, the Trump administration's agreement was conditional. The Trump told to the Taliban that if the Taliban do not fulfill their promises, then they would not withdraw the U.S. forces from the Afghanistan. On the other side, when Joe Biden became the president of U.S., So the Biden announced unconditional withdrawal, which has completely changed the scenario of Afghanistan, because the first main reason behind the collapse of the Afghan government is that the Afghan government was not expecting from the Biden's unconditional withdrawal. The
Mm.
second thing was that the Taliban was preparing for the current scenario for the last 2 decades. On the other side, the Afghan government was not ready for this scenario. So this is the one question, because the Afghan government has completely lose its intelligence system, its air system, its equipments, its aircraft, its drone, its air support, everything, its contractors, which
Mm.
keep the Taliban at bay for the 2 decades. So that was the second reason that the Afghan government collapsed, because the withdrawal was very quick and abrupt.
Maybe I can just follow up on a question there, if that's all right, because I think you're making a really interesting point here, and that is the change of scenario, as you so put it. And I just want to pick up on that, because you quite rightly pointed out three key points that the Taliban agreed on, being reduction of violence to lead to a ceasefire, complete cessation of any relations with terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, and of course, sincerely participate in intra-Afghan talks. Now, you said that Taliban has not upheld that side of the story. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think that's a really important point, because the messages arguably we're now receiving is that, Taliban has taken over power peacefully, and that maybe, just maybe, Taliban is showing signs that it might have changed. And I just want to explore that. To what extent do you agree that that is true or not?
No, the Taliban basically, the Trump administration and the Biden administration constant announcement of the withdrawal has completely encouraged the Taliban for the victory. After there is one more scenario behind the current situation. In the 19th century, there was a superpower, the Great Britain. They came to Afghanistan, and they had been defeated by Afghans. And then the second superpower came to Afghanistan, and that was USSR. USSR also collapsed when they lose their war in Afghanistan. So in this time, when the Trump continuously told to the media, and he was constantly giving deadline to the Taliban that they would withdraw their forces from Afghanistan. And on the other side, the Taliban's main sentence was that you have watch and we have time. So the Taliban constantly said that they had defeated two superpower in the past 1 century, and on the other side, the U.S. is on the verge of the defeat. So now today, after the withdrawal of U.S. forces, even now, just 1 hour before, the Joe Biden said that Afghanistan is the graveyard of the great empires. So now the Taliban has changed their mindset after the deadline of Biden's and Trump, and they told to the Afghans that they defeated three superpower, and Afghan government is nothing for them.
Yeah, of course.
The second thing is that the Taliban, first they were ready to resolve the Afghan issue by negotiation and peace talks. But after, yes, they constantly demanded from the Afghan government to hand over them the authority of the 15 provinces. And they also are demanding that there was some issues or constitutional issues. They also demanded that we should reform the Afghanistan constitutions. So, and the third demand of the Taliban was that they want because the Taliban don't have any roots in the Afghan population. Just a few years ago, Asia Society managed a survey in Afghanistan where the result was that 92% Afghans supported Ashraf Ghani's government. On the other side, just 4% Afghans supported the Taliban, and the Taliban was not ready for the election because they know that they don't have any roots in the Afghan population, and they wanted a permanent designations in the Afghan government, like the Ministry of Interior Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Policy, the Ministry of Law, the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and so on. So uh, that was their demand. So after Biden's unconditional withdrawal, they understood that the US defeated, and they started telling the narrative, and they spread their narrative that three superpower defeated by Afghans. So now Afghan government is nothing before them, and they started. They took interest in the victory and completely avoided the peace process, and there was zero result of the one peace process. Intra-Afghan talks, there was many meetings, like previously before this. In the last month, there was the intra-Afghan talks in the Doha, and after that meeting, Ashraf Ghani told to the Afghan media that the Taliban didn't talk to resolve the Afghan issue. They just talked for 2 days about coronavirus, and they were not interested to about peace talk, about reconciliation, about the Afghan issues of the major issues of Afghanistan to make consensus on that. And for 2 days, Taliban just talk about the coronavirus.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just ask you another question there because I think if I'm understanding you correctly, and maybe I'll just quickly paraphrase what I've picked up from you saying, is that the narrative shifted, or the scenario shifted the moment Biden declared that there will be an unconditional withdrawal. In other words, that regardless of the Doha agreement and the conditions that have not necessarily been met by the Taliban, so the conditions of reducing violence, complete cessation of dealings with organizations like Al-Qaeda, and sincerely participating in intra-Afghan talks, that changed the narrative. The moment it became obvious that the US is withdrawing regardless, that signaled to the Taliban that the US is going regardless of the conditions, but more importantly, that also signaled to the people of Afghanistan, who, as you point out through that survey, didn't really support the Taliban in large numbers, but because it was inevitable that the Taliban will now regain control, we saw this almost a landslide of Taliban takeover, and collapse of various government centers and population centers around the country, almost without any shots fired, really. While there was pockets of resistance, many just basically put their weapons down and realized that the fight it would be for nothing. Is that an accurate summary of what you've just covered?
Yes, I am entirely agree with you because the Taliban was not a very strong organization. Taliban just had 50,000 fighters, and they were not a regular fighter. Just 5 to 10,000 fighters were fighting in Afghanistan, and other were living in their sanctuaries. So, and they were giving special periods and duration to the fighters. In 1 year, one fighters were just fighting for 2 months and 3 months. They were not fighting for the whole year. So when the scenario changed and unconditional exit announced by the Joe Biden, and then when the Taliban understood that US is going without without any restrictions, because the Trump administration told to the Taliban that in one time the Trump administration completely ended its peace process with the Taliban when the Taliban violated that agreement when they attacked the US forces in Afghanistan. So Trump was very restricted on that agreement. On the other side, when the Taliban completely violated the Trump agreement when the Biden became the president of the US, and that Biden didn't pressurize the Taliban to follow their commitments. And when they understood that US is not interested in Afghanistan, and even they understood that they have no concern when the Taliban violates the US agreement, they understood that it is a time of victory. And after that, the Doha peace process has legitimized the Taliban, and they got a huge space in the international diplomacy. And after that, they continuously visited to Russia, to China, to Pakistan, to Iran, to Uzbekistan, to Tajikistan, and other countries. And they made a very strong relation with these countries. Even they initiated relations with India, which is very opponents to the Taliban. And at this time, the Taliban has applied a very different strategy from the previous one. Previously, the north of Afghanistan, and the Taliban didn't capture the northern Afghanistan in the end of their regimes. Now they firstly captured northern Afghanistan, and then they came to southern Afghanistan, because they already made their relations with the Iran, with the Russia, with the India, and other Central Asian countries like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. These Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, India, and Russia, they enormously funded and provided military equipments to Northern Alliance in the 90s, when Northern Alliance, including Abdul Rashid Dostum, the main warlord of Afghanistan, Ahmad Shah Massoud, and Abdul Ali Mazari, these were the main political figure of Afghanistan, and they were leading some very big ethnicities. Like Ahmad Shah Massoud was leading Tajik ethnicity, and Abdul Rashid Dostum was leading Uzbek ethnicity, and Abdul Ali Mazari and Ustad Mahakik was leading Hazara ethnicity in Afghanistan, and they all were fighting against the Taliban, and they were getting support from these countries. But now this time, the Taliban first developed their relation with those countries who provided support to Northern Alliance, and in order to get regional support and to prevent and deter the reconstitutions of the Northern Alliance. So this was the first strategy of the Taliban, and they applied. The second strategy, they already made relation with China and completely diminished the Chinese concerns in Afghanistan, and they told to China that we don't act against your interest in the Afghanistan. And they also made diplomacy with Russia and told them that this time they wouldn't take any step against the Russian interest. And similarly, they uh, told to the Iran, they told to Pakistan, and they got regional support. On the other side, the Afghan government failed to get the regional support. And to, if you see it during the past 3 months, almost the Taliban visited various countries more than 25 times. On the other side, the Afghan Ashraf Ghani and Afghan Foreign Minister Anip Atmar, they just visited 3 countries. So the Taliban was very active in their diplomacy. On the other side, Afghan government was not active in their diplomacy. So they changed the mindset of the regional powers, and also convinced them about their concern and got support from them.
Yeah, no, I think your summary is exceptional, and I think it provides a nuanced analysis that so much lacks in our understanding of what's happening. And I particularly want to just narrow in on the point that since the Doha Agreement, if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that the agreement itself validated the Taliban in Doha as almost a pseudo-government in exile that's sitting in Doha. And because of the narratives that, and also the attention that was given to the Taliban by a lot of the mainstream media and narratives surrounding the war in Afghanistan, that allowed the Taliban to gather momentum, whereas the Afghan national government remained in the shadows. My question still remains, why did all of the regional countries you named, like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, China, even India and Russia, why was it in their interest to side with Taliban?
Okay, because the China, Russia, and India, they particularly Iran, their interest, they seek their interest in the peaceful Afghanistan, because the whole world and almost all economists, they are agree that the China will emerge the second superpower of the world in 2030 and 35. So the whole Chinese infrastructure will be built based on Afghanistan, and their direction will be implemented in Afghanistan. So the China would not become the superpower, economic superpower of the world with the war in Afghanistan. So the Taliban diplomatically convinced the China that the war will prolong, and your intentions, your interests will be dismantled in Afghanistan until the war is going on between the Afghan government and the Taliban. So they have made some agreement with the China. On the other side, the Russian expansionism policy is underway in the Central Asia, and they captured some type of in soft diplomacy. They increased and mounted their culture, their policies, their foreign policies, and their export to the Central Asia. And now they want to enter in the South Asia. And within the war in Afghanistan, they can't enter to South Asia in contested and conflicted Afghanistan. So they also want to increase their influence into South Asia. And for that, peace in Afghanistan is essential for the Russia. On the other hand, there is a contest between India and Pakistan to capture the Central Asian economic markets. Because the India has already captured South Asia by diplomacy and by economic. Because the circumference when the terms of Pakistan comes, those South Asian countries don't participate in the Pakistan terms when the meeting here managed in Pakistan, because they all support India, and India economically has mounted their links with the South Asia. Now it is interested in the Central Asia. On the other side, Pakistan want to use their land, their sea as an economic hub for Central Asia, because Pakistan is in the economic crisis, and it is facing harsh crisis only after the Pakistan economic crisis will diminish if it use the links, the ways of Afghanistan, and to increase its economic influence in Central Asia. So there is contest. The Taliban is the natural ally of the Pakistan, and Pakistan wanted to reinstall the Taliban in order to capture Central Asian markets. And the second reason of the Pakistan was that there is one more issue behind this scenario. The Durand Line is the second issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Every democratic government of the Afghanistan rejected to recognize the Durand Line as an international border. And after losing Bangladesh, Pakistan has a very great concerns over the Durand Line, because they have already lose their whole population and the whole country in the 70s. And now they are striving to protect the remaining Afghanistan. So on the other side, the Taliban don't believe on regional boundaries. They say that all Muslims are one, and we don't believe on boundaries on anything. So the Taliban don't have any concerns on the Durand Line. This is the second issue. I think the Ashraf Ghani has asked from the Taliban that why they are not talking about the Durand Line. The Durand Line was basically, there was Afghanistan with Great Britain's demarcated a line on the center of Afghanistan and divided Afghanistan on two parts. And the second part now, after the emergence of India and Pakistan, one part became the part of Pakistan, and the second part remained independent, which we call now Afghanistan. So this is the third issue. The regional countries provided support to them. On the other side, the main regional power on the other side, which is Iran. Iran also want to increase their cultural influence in Afghanistan. So they already claiming that they have historic links with the Tajik, Uzbek, and Hazara, and they have same civilization and same culture, same history, everything they have same. So now the democratic government of Afghanistan has enormously diminished the influence of the Iran in Afghanistan. Now the Iran is trying to increase their influence in Afghanistan by supporting Taliban, because they both have same religious mind, same religious policies. So the Iran is also seek their interests under the government of the Taliban.
Of course, again, thank you for that outstanding summary of the regional dynamics, which again, I don't think it's something we talk about enough when we look at the current situation in Afghanistan. Just one thing I want to pick up on, because I think it's a really important point you made early on, and that is that Taliban doesn't really have structures, governmental structures. It doesn't have necessarily policies. It's riding the wave of an emotional sentiment, and of course the link to the religious sentiment as well. Is this maybe the reason why Taliban has allowed basically the mayor of Kabul to retain power, to in some small way allow for the law and order or rules within Kabul to continue? How do you view that move by Taliban?
The Taliban, basically, there is not a single master degree holders in the lands of the Taliban. There is no historian, no economist, no doctor, no engineer, no IR expert, no sociologist, no political scientist. They are just warriors. And they don't know the systems because they just fought for 3 decades. And they can't speak English. And they didn't attend the schools, the universities, the colleges, and they can't run the country. How? And ignorant people can run the large country, because a country need economists. There is a banking system. You can't run a banking system by the warriors. There is a country need a foreign policy, and you need a political scientist, you need a IR expert to establish your foreign policy. Our country need to run hospitals, and there isn't a single doctors in the lands of the Taliban. A country need to reconstructure, to establish their infrastructure system, and there is not a single engineer in the line of the Taliban. There is no sociologist. So country need. There is a air system, there is flight, there is airports. So how can the Taliban, how they can run this kind of country? So now I think the regional powers understood that they need some kind of people in Afghanistan who don't know the policies, who don't know the culture, who don't know the diplomatic systems, and they seek their interest in these type of people who don't know anything about running the systems. I think there is contestations in the Taliban, in the Afghanistan, among the great powers, particularly the regional powers, and they don't want brilliant and clever people in Afghanistan, and they want these kind of people who don't know anything, and they seek their interest in these kind of people.
Okay, right. So that actually goes to the next question I wanted to ask, and that is, given what we know is happening right now, there is, at least I haven't heard much talk about the formation of an actual government by the Taliban, which would suggest that, as you said, they don't necessarily have the necessary technocrats or technically savvy people to run and establish a government. So what do you see as the next point? What kind of government can the Taliban put together, or how will it put a government together?
The Taliban, before capturing the Kabul, they were continuously talking about the interim government, and it was their main demand from the Ashraf Ghani to resign and establish an interim government in Afghanistan in order to resolve the Afghan issue. So after capturing Kabul, the Taliban suddenly told to the Afghans that they are not interested in the interim government and they want to establish their own government, religious government. So this is very astonishing point for the Afghans because they once again they rejected their own demands. So now there is meetings and meetings are underway in Kabul between the Taliban delegations and Hamid Karzai, ex-president of the Afghanistan, Abdullah, and Ustad Siab Gulbadin Hikmatyar. The conversation is underway among them, and the Taliban can't run a country without an inclusive government because the Taliban don't have any influence in other ethnicities like Uzbek, like Tajik, like Hazaras. There is very little support in that communities the Taliban has. So now the main elders, the warlords, and the main representative of these communities, the Tajiks' main leader is the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ahmad Massoud, and Abdullah. And the Uzbeks' leader is Abdul Rashid Dostam, and the Hazara's leader is Ustad Muhakkik. And without including these people in the government, I think they can't run a country for 1 year. And the main reason behind the collapsing of the Ashraf Ghani's government is that Ashraf Ghani has, in the second term, Ashraf Ghani sidelined these warlords and they started struggle against them. Ashraf Ghani has provided space to the intelligentsia and to the young generation of Afghanistan. Because they understood that these warlords are corrupt and they are just interested in corruption and don't take interest in the development of Afghanistan. And that is the main reason when the Taliban started capturing northern areas, even northern like Panjshir, like Faizabad city and other areas of northern Afghanistan. The Taliban didn't capture those areas in the end of their regime. And there was a very, very strong war between the Taliban and these minorities of Afghanistan. But this time they didn't resist it even. So now I think the best way, and they also, the spokesman of the Taliban, yesterday they told to us Ashraf Ghani and other leaders of Afghanistan, even they told Ashraf Ghani that work with us under our administration. And that is I think is a good gesture for Afghanistan, because in order to avoid other militancy, because now Amrullah Saleh and the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ahmad Massoud, they are in the Panjshir valley, and they are regrouping their people and start a militancy against the Taliban's regime. So I think the second militancy that Afghanistan is suffering from the largest war of the human history, 4 decades war. No country has saw 4 decades constant war, and almost 3 million people has lose their in Afghanistan in the 4 decades war. So now I think an inclusive government, the Taliban has also showed their consent in the inclusive government. Currently, an inclusive government consisting on all groups, all ethnicities, and all factions. Even the leader of the current Ashraf Ghani's government is very important. And the second thing, Previously, the whole Afghan state collapsed in the Taliban's regime because their military collapsed, their education system collapsed, their cities collapsed, everything, agriculture system was collapsed. So now I think Taliban should maintain the current system because there is not a single sociologist. And on the other side, there are more than 50 universities in Afghanistan. So they should tell the current service members of the Afghan government to maintain your jobs, whether they are in airports, whether they are in hospitals, whether they are in the infrastructure land, whether they are in universities. So that is the only way to govern Afghanistan. On the other hand, if they establish their own government consisting just on the Taliban, I think that kind of government can't survive for a single years in Afghanistan.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that arguably the Taliban becomes the almost ceremonial leadership of Afghanistan, but that it relies on a coalition effectively of all the various, as you said, warlords and even separate factions within the Taliban, as well as trying to keep the public service sector as it is at the moment. Now, that makes sense, but how realistic do you think that actually is?
I think today we saw the Taliban's representative went to one hospital in the Kabul where female doctors were working in that hospitals, and they told to that female doctors that just put on scarf on your face and your bodies and continue your jobs. We don't have any concerns from you. I think that is a positive message for the Afghanistan. Yes, they will change the system. I think the one institution like Afghan army that will be dismantled by the Taliban because they are not interested in the Taliban on the Afghan army, and they will make some other sort of the army for Afghanistan. And in other case, like I told you, they don't have a single pilot in their lands, so how they can run the airports, flights, and helicopters of Afghanistan? So I think this time they have learned something from the past, and they have changed their mind, and that is the only solution of Afghanistan. If they tell the current service member in all walks of life and every department of Afghanistan to maintain your jobs, if they want to protect the current institutions of Afghanistan, because yes, you should put your representative in every department of Afghanistan. Afghans don't have any concern from that, but they can't run the systems. The current members of the system should continue, and I think Afghans have a lot of expectation from them to maintain the current system, and they have also changed their mindset in this time. I think there will be some changes, but the current system will prevail.
Okay, well, that's at least a little bit more hopeful than what we're often hearing now as well. And we have heard a lot of reports of killings and murders and stuff over the last couple of weeks. But also, more importantly, I think we're seeing, at least in our media and social media, scenes of absolute chaos at Kabul airport, Even people, holding on to wheels of planes departing and then unfortunately falling from the sky to their death. So there's an image that there's chaos in Kabul, although through other sources, I'm also hearing that it's actually rather quiet. What are you seeing on the ground, and what is the general sentiment of the people of Kabul about the situation at the moment?
Yes, I think the current abrupt and quick advancement of the Taliban, and finally the victory of the Taliban, has not just shocked the Afghans, and they shocked the entire world. So whole Afghans are surprised now, and Afghans were not ready for this kind of scenario, and it is came in Afghanistan abruptly. So there were 15 lakh servicemen of the Ashraf Ghani's administrations, and the Taliban, and there were just 3 lakh army of the Afghan army. They were fighting with the Taliban in the 34 provinces of Afghanistan, and there are some brigades that were working under commandos, under brigadiers, and they killed around thousands of the Taliban. And there are some commandos. The Taliban are claiming that these commandos killed their thousands of members, like the commando of Lashkar-Gah Sami Sadat and the commando of Saripul Hashim Regwal, who was working under the uh, rock star general of Afghanistan, General Abdul Razik. And there are some more people. So these are Afghan army personnel are receiving threats from the Taliban and the members of those Taliban who have lost their loved ones. Because if the Taliban give forgiveness to these people, those members who lose their cousins, their brothers, their family members, now they are interested now to take their revenge. And now in these 3 lakh army, every member, particularly brigadiers, colonial, and other big designators, they are facing harsh threats from the Taliban. On the other side, we saw, and we are hearing from Kandahar that almost 3 to 4,000 people the Taliban captured from their homes, and then they killed them in front of their family members. On the other side, we are hearing news in Kabul that they are searching their opponents in Kabul and going to door by door and capturing their main opponents of the army. The second main vulnerable uh, faction is the journalists that were working for the international media. They also face very a lot of troubles in Afghanistan because they were working for the victimized population of Afghanistan, and they were victimized from the violence of the Taliban. So journalist community has been receiving threats from the Taliban, and they are in very disturbing situation. And then the women rights activists, they are also in very great catastrophe, and they are facing a very bad situation in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So all members, every member, there were 15 lakh service members of the Afghan government. Every member feel insecurity in Afghanistan, particularly journalists, army personnel, uh, women rights activists, and the civil rights activists. they are facing, because they are facing very troubling situation in Afghanistan. And today you saw almost 100 people, they were not leaving the US flight to take off from the Kabul airport, and they understood that if they leave Kabul airport and enter into the Kabul city, there is no hope for the life, because they know they committed very big crimes against the Taliban. They understood, and the Taliban said that these people uh, committed crimes, and the result of that crimes is nothing but killing to them. So on the other side, uh, European countries and other countries like USA, UK, Germany, France, Canada, Australia, they are providing visas and asylum just to those people who work for their army and who work for the NGOs, uh, for their NGOs. So I think these are very, very unfair uh, for those Afghans that work for this system. I think more than 1 lakh people have been receiving threats and have been uh, suffering from the death threats. So these countries, at least they should provide 1 lakh asylum to the Afghanistan, because it is also part of international law to provide asylum to those people who face they don't have any life in Afghanistan. They are just going in one home, another home, another home, and they are uh, just what you can say. They understand that just few days of their life is left in Afghanistan. So if the other countries don't provide asylum to these people, there will be a very great genocide of the Afghan, of the previous administration service member in Afghanistan.
That's a very sobering analysis. Maybe one of my last questions to you, conscious of the time, but what can the world do? What do you expect and want organizations like the UN? What do you want from what should the Security Council do? What can be done now, given that Taliban has taken power, that US is out and Western powers are out, the regional powers have sided with the Taliban for their own reasons. What can the world do, and what do you expect organizations like the UN and UN Security Council to do?
Yes, UN Security Council and United Nations is the only institution of the world that can prevent the ongoing genocide in Afghanistan, the genocide of the previous administration service member. So they can pressurize the Taliban to forgive these all peoples who work in the previous uh, administrations, and common amnesty for all Afghans, particularly for the past administration's service member, is very important in order to halt Afghanistan from another catastrophe. And only UN and UN Security Council can do that, can abide the Taliban to stop acts against these people. And the second thing, the Afghan society is there is a tribal kind of society, and there one village support the Taliban and other village support Afghan. They supported the Afghan army during the past 2 decades. And there is tribal enmity. There is very dangerous situation. If the Taliban forgive these all people, so those tribal members who lose their loved ones while fighting against the Afghan army, they will not forget those people. And on the other side, the those Afghan army members, they when they fought against the Taliban and killed the members of the Taliban uh, families. So now the administration has already collapsed, and they have no support from the government, and they are living in Afghanistan, and there is a mounting dangers of the tribal enmities in Afghanistan. So that can only prevented by the Taliban. So if some tribal elders start their enmity against other tribal, there will be a very big punishment for them. So and in this area, United Nations can also stop these people, can provide instruction to the Taliban to stop these kind of violence in Afghanistan. And yes, and the third things, a large number of people came into Afghanistan during the past 2 decades, particularly intelligentsia like sociologists, political scientists, IR experts, philosophers, doctors, engineers, pilots, and they are facing very, very harsh situations. And there is the third very big issue of the Afghanistan is the brain drain. A lot of highly educated people are fleeing from Afghanistan. So the United Nations can also provide instruction to the Taliban to forgive these all people and to provide the environment of peace to these people, so they stop their fleeing, their departing from Afghanistan. And the fourth very big issue in Afghanistan is the human rights violations, because the Afghan girls and women, they enjoyed the same kind of freedom like the women of other parts of the world are enjoying now. So now the whole women today I saw in various parts of Afghanistan, and when I contact with our colleagues, female members, they are just crying that we don't have any life in Kabul, we don't have any entertainment places in Kabul, and we don't have any space where in hotels, in the streets, and we don't have any right to do our jobs. So in this area, United Nations can also instruct the Taliban to provide freedom to the girls of the Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So in these areas, this is very important from the for the United Nations to do a lot in these areas.
Yeah, to put some pressure on the Taliban to actually allow these arguably victories over the past 20 years to not just disappear.
This is also these kind of cruelties and viciousness is the violation of the international law.
Yeah.
So yes, the United Nations and UK, Canada, US, Russia, and China should tell the Taliban that they would not recognize and they would not legitimize the current Taliban government if they continue their violence if they continue to deprive Afghan girls from their rights. I think this kind of narrative should be spread by these countries and the United Nations.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Hizbullah, I know I've taken a lot more of your time than we agreed initially, and I thank you for it. But maybe one last question, because I'm conscious that you are putting yourself at grave danger by even speaking to me or any other foreigners. What does the future hold for you? What will you do in the coming days?
I think there will be no life for us. There will be no happiness, no enjoyment, no entertainments, and Afghanistan will be a graveyard for Afghanistan, for Afghans, and our Afghanistan has already changed into from yes, it was paradise, and now it is changed into the hell. So we don't have any expectation of life, of enjoyment, of rights, and we don't have any expectation from the Taliban to provide us human rights, and our human rights will be violated because we saw them in the previous administrations, and at that time we just saw cruelties, and now yes, they have changed their mindset. They've changed little mindset, but on the other hand, their mind didn't change completely. So don't hope for life. And this is a question of price. I can't provide you. I can't give you answer of this question. And my cause is the only answer of this question.
Hizbullah, I hear the pain in your voice, and my heart cries with you. I think this is a testing and trying time, and I wish I could say more apart from stay safe. And the best I can do is I will push this conversation out far and wide, and let's hope that the world hears what's happening on the ground and the threat that is faced by people like yourself and those who, over the past 20 years, stood up against what the Taliban tried to force on them. And let's hope that the Taliban, in its current takeover, will see some sense in retaining the public sector that has been established, and will see some sense in allowing people who have supported the previous regime or the government to remain in Afghanistan and part of the Afghan society. I also hope that anyone in power amongst the United Nations or United Nations Security Council or any of the halls of power around the world realizes how grave the situation is for people like yourself, and that they actually do something about it. But from me, on a personal note, I thank you for being brave and courageous to actually speak with me, to share your view from the ground with the world that I'm in contact with.
Thank you. I am so happy to talk with you, and I am very thankful to you that you provided your time and your forum for us to share and to listen our cries and to listen and to spread the realities of the current Afghanistan. So thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Voices of War. You can access all episodes on www.thevoicesofwar.com or by subscribing wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, as we'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can reach me on info@thevoicesofwar.com.